walking virtually along the world's most revered footpaths and connecting the global community of pilgrims. It's the Sacred Steps Podcast, available on YouTube and your favorite podcast app. Broadcasting from the Shaymare Studios in Florida, here's your host, pilgrim, backpacker, and author, Kevin Donahue.
Buen Camino, pilgrims, and welcome back to the Sacred Steps Podcast. I'm Kevin Donahue. On this show, we're walking virtually alongside pilgrims and authors, connecting a community of pilgrims from across the globe. If this is your first episode, welcome to the podcast. Please click subscribe so that our future episodes will be available to you automatically. You'll find links from today's discussions below in the show notes on your podcast app, as well as on YouTube. On today's episode, we're walking virtually alongside Irish pilgrim and author Natasha Murtagh. Many of you may know Natasha from her book, Buen Camino, which she co-wrote with her father, famed Irish journalist Peter Murtagh, or from her time as a reporter for the Irish National Public Radio. Natasha is here to share stories from her Camino pilgrimage and its transformative power on a father-daughter relationship, as well as tales from her recent walks in Ireland along the Wicklow Way. We're discussing the book, Buen Camino, from Patrick to Santiago de Compostela, with Irish pilgrim Natasha Murtagh on today's episode of the Sacred Steps Podcast. Natasha Murtagh, welcome to the Sacred Steps Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited.
I was excited to connect with you because over the course of the summer, and I want to get to it in a moment, but you've been on some adventures. You've been walking in your native Ireland. And as someone who's done some walks in Ireland, I am so fascinated with the different routes. So I want to get to that, but I also want to recognize Natasha, you're a published author. You wrote your first book a few years ago, Buen Camino, a story about your walk with your father. And I want to ask you, what drew you to pilgrimage?
I wish I could say something wonderful like it was calling me. But I was only 16 when I did my first Camino. And so it was actually my dad. He was motorcycling through Spain with his best friend, Tony. And they kept seeing backpackers walking through fields. And they didn't really know what they were up to. And they realized it was this thing called the Camino de Santiago. And my father and I love walking. And we have always walked together since I was a little girl. And so he came home from that trip and he said, "Do you want to go on a walk in Spain with me?" And I thought, okay. And that's when we did the first bit of the Camino. We did it for, I think, 10 days. We went from Leon to Santiago de Compostela. And that was it. We were just absolutely hooked ever since. And we went back a couple more times.
So in the course of walking with your father, who's noted journalist Peter Murtagh, first, how's your dad doing? How's the family? Everybody's good?
Everybody's good. Yeah, mum and dad are living out on the west coast of Ireland in their holiday home, trying to stay away from the east coast, which is where I am because of the old bloody, dare I say, COVID. It's just safer and more space for them to be out there. And until they get vaccinated, they won't be coming back. But they're good. They're good and they're healthy.
That's great to hear. You and your father wrote the book Buen Camino, telling about your journey from Patrick to Santiago de Compostela. And I wonder if you could take us into that for just a moment, because many of our listeners are very familiar with the Camino de Santiago. In fact, if you haven't read Natasha's book, we'll link it in the show notes below, because this is a great read. It's not just a Camino story, but it's also a story about the relationship between a father and a daughter. You took turns in kind of alternating some storytelling elements here, and I'd love to hear a little bit about your experiences along the way.
Mm-hmm. So I suppose we knew we were going to go and do the full whack. So I think it was 46 days, and it was just over 1,000 kilometers, and we had done we'd done that little bit beforehand when I was 16, and this one was I think I was 17 when we did the big one. And Dad is really into history, and he really wanted to link up the connection between Patrick and Santiago de Compostela. And this is all him. I just sat back and let him do all of this planning. But he basically wanted our first day of doing the pilgrimage to be when we were coming to the top of Patrick and the sun was rising on us. The sun was also rising in Santiago de Compostela on St. James's Day. So we wanted it to all sort of come together. So we started the hike it must have been about, this is going back quite a few years, so forgive my memory, because I'm 29 now, so it's over 10 years ago. But we started hiking, I think, at about 3 or 4 in the morning to make it up to Patrick for sunrise. And we brought our wonderful friend, Asti, who is a farmer from Lewisburg in Dochmacon in County Mayo, where we have our holiday home. And Austin and my mum and dad and me have remained very close friends, and he's now considered the oldest man in the village, and he's still fit as a fiddle. He's brilliant. And so the three of us climbed up Patrick, and it was a little bit misty, but the sun rose and it was wonderful. We went down the mountain, we went back to the cottage, and we had, bacon sandwiches and tea. And then we said our goodbyes, and Mum drove us straight to the airport, Knock Airport in Mayo. And we flew into, I want to say Santander, and we flew somewhere. We got into France first, and then we had to get a train. And then our first official day on the pilgrimage was at the very, very, very beginning in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. And that is just on the French side of the Pyrenees. And so we just took it from there. And we would get up every day pretty early because we were doing it at a hot time, and we wanted to get, most of our kilometers in before the sun really started beating down on us. So we'd usually start walking at around 7 a.m. And the first bit was, we had to go over the French Pyrenees, then down into Roncesvalles. And it honestly was just the best thing, one of the best things I've ever done in my life. I've done a lot of things now, but, right up until I was 25, I would have said that Camino with my dad was the best thing that I've ever done. It really, really shaped the person that I am now. And Dad and I were close beforehand, but we're at a different level now, having those 42 days walking together from one side of France over the Pyrenees all the way across Spain with your dad when you're a 17-year-old girl and he's a 60-something, year old man. It's quite special. Or was he actually, he might have been in his late 50s. He'll kill me for saying that.
Yeah, we'll have to, don't tell him. If you're listening to the podcast, Peter, it's Kevin's mistake. As we go through, And I've had a chance to read the book on Kindle, and I don't know if I mentioned it, but please take a shot, download Natasha's book. You'll really enjoy it. I love the storytelling here because you meet a lot of Spanish people along the way who they just embrace you and your father and make this Camino a really special experience for the two of you. I wonder if you talk a little bit about the Spaniards you met along the way.
Yeah, so the one that sticks out the most is we got to a town. I think we'd been walking for maybe just over a week, maybe 2 weeks. We got to a town called Estrella, and it is famous. Although Pamplona in Spain is famous for the running of the bulls, it actually began in Estrella, and it's this day where they all wear white and they have red little scarves around their necks, and everyone comes out onto the streets, and the streets are blocked off with large sort of barriers. And there is, a pen at the start of the town, and there's a pen at the end of the town. And this gun goes off. Bulls are released into the streets, and Spanish men, they run. And, there's a lot of jumping in doorways, rolling under the fence. But, the men that make it to the pen before the bulls are celebrated and stuff. But it's this mad sort of festival with, color and life and happiness and singing and all this. And Dad and I got to the town the day before this was all kicking off. And we were supposed to be there for one night and then move on. And Dad was like, there's absolutely no way we're missing this. No way. And he was right. So we were standing on the side of the fence. We wanted to watch the running of the bulls, and literally at the last minute, Dad is just like, I'm running, and he hops over the fence. And I was like, Dad, what are you doing? I was like, you can't leave me. I have to do it too. So I hopped over the fence, and all of the Spanish people around the fence, they were like, no. And they sort of like, they were saying no, but they were also like, oh my God, these tourists, this is hilarious. And there was this, man and his young daughter standing amongst these men in their uniforms, and the gun goes off and we start running. And just before I started running, Dad said, if you fall, roll to the floor. And I was like, oh God, great advice there, Dad. Thanks. And I remember being like, yeah, Mom's going to kill you. But it was absolutely great crack. And I think the Spanish people just absolutely, they loved that we did it. And then we marched in the sort of parade afterwards. And you wouldn't have seen this because you read the book on Kindle, but there was this photograph taken of the march, and there's Dad and I plonked right in the middle of the parade, and it was on like the national newspaper. And after the whole palaver, there was this man. Oh God, I can't remember his name. Pablito? I think his name was Pablito. He, very, very, very old man. He must have been around pushing, well, I'd say he was about 80, 81 too. And he was very, very small, and he didn't have a word of English. And he had sort of seen that Dad and I were getting involved and partaking in this thing, and he wanted us to come to his house so that he could show us something. And again, I didn't speak Spanish back then, and Dad, of course, certainly didn't. So we had no communication whatsoever, but he had such a kindness to him. And he was, ushering us to go back to his house. And we were like, God, this is so nice. Okay. We ended up going back to his house, this little farmhouse up on the hill. We walked, so it was just outside. And he took me by the hand and he led me to a shed where there was a pile of sticks and then a pile of gourds. They kind of looked like a butternut squash. I don't know what you guys call them in America. Is it just squash?
We actually just go with butternut squash as well.
Okay. My apologies.
No, that's good. That's perfect. We've got one. That's one thing we have in common.
So he had these gourds, and he would dry out the gourds. He would take out the inside and all the seeds, dry them out, and then he would make these beautiful walking sticks with gourds, and he put little decorations on them. And he was showing me how he made these. And if you read the book, you'll remember that Dad found this incredibly emotional, and he had to turn away. And I thought the way Dad wrote it in the book was very beautiful. He said something along the lines of, there was this man that was showing my daughter something that he had been making for years and years, and how he would choose not the first stick, not the second stick, but the perfect stick for the perfect gourd. And every single staff that he made, so much love and care was put into it. And this is why I'm bringing my daughter on the Camino, because it is teaching her things about life that she cannot learn on MTV or the hills or in Dundrum Shopping Centre or with any of those things. This is what life is all about. And this is why I'm bringing her on the Camino, which I just thought was really, really touching. And I remember Dad being very emotional afterwards. And I wasn't really sure why, but there were little moments of that all along the way that we were just shown from the Spanish people. If you're a pilgrim walking the Camino, there's sort of this automatic respect. And, a lot of the locals will, their homes will be along the Camino, and during the summer they'll leave their front door open, and there will be little tables with bowls of fruit and like little bottles of water, and they'll, please take one. And it's such a path of, this sounds really corny, but there's a lot of love along the path, and not just among other pilgrims, along people, acknowledging that you are walking this pilgrimage.
The Spanish completely embrace the pilgrims, and some of their act of service to the pilgrims are to make these, donations to pilgrims in need. And I think that's, first of all, that's an incredibly touching story from the book. But it speaks to the relationship and sort of the growth and the togetherness that you and your father experienced that you wrote about in the Camino. And it's so beautiful. And one of my favorite aspects of the book are these letters that are kind of exchanged that you wrote to your father and he wrote to you. And I wonder if you'd share a little bit about that with our listeners who might be inspired.
Yeah. Oh God, that was very emotional as well. I can't remember where we had just come from, but I do remember it was, compared to the other days, it was a fairly insignificant period. There was nothing really that much to say about the end of the day, walking and stuff. And I remember Dad saying, "Do you mind if I write on the laptop today first?" So after every day walking, because we wrote along the way, so that's why it's so fresh, and the imagery is so vivid, I believe, is because we wrote every single day right after each day had happened. And Dad always let me write first because, I don't know, he just thought that maybe I'd want to get it out of the way. But on this day, he said, "Can I write my piece first?" I said, "Yeah, sure, no problem." And after he had written it, he asked me to read over it, which he had never done. But I would always say, "Would you read over mine and correct all of the millions of spelling mistakes I've done?" But he never needed me to look over his. But on this day, he said, "Would you mind looking over what I've written? I need to go to the shop." And I was like, "Yeah, okay, that's strange." And I was sitting down in the kitchen area of this hostel, and I opened up the laptop and I clicked on his piece, and I just remember seeing "Dear Natasha." And I'm going to get emotional. Every time I read it, every time I think of it, I get emotional, because it's possibly the nicest thing either of my parents have ever written for me. And it basically just talks about, when we're walking, he's often thinking about me and my life and how I'm growing up to be, a wonderful woman, and how he hopes that doing this walk together will, bring me memories and guide me in life. And, it's a really, really, really special letter. And it was such a surprise, and it made me so happy. And when he came back from the shop, I was like bawling, crying. And it was kind of it was a letter of just him starting from the moment I was welcomed into the world, and him saying to my mum, "We have a little girl and she's got red hair," right up into, me going to school and watching me grow up. And it was a letter of real love from my dad. It's incredibly special, means the world to me. And so I ended up writing one back. And so we had both of the letters included in the book, which a lot of people have commented on.
Yeah. There are a lot of moments in your book where you can see the relationship, really gelling, and the two of you sharing an experience together, growing together. But I think your father must have been so moved by just being on the Camino in this space where, anything can happen, but you've got this room to grow together. It's just such a touching book, and I really appreciate you sharing with it. And clearly, the letters are a big part of the takeaway. Your experiences along the Camino and the Caminos that you've walked were a big part of the takeaway. But I think rather than just being a travel log, this is a real story about the space the Camino creates for people if they're willing to embrace it. And I really just was wowed by the book. So thanks for putting it out there. I know it's been a bit. I don't know if there'll be a future book coming up. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that in a moment as well. But you've been walking more recently in Ireland. And you did a piece, for those who aren't familiar with Natasha, maybe from the United States, or for our listeners in South Africa. We'll link her bio in the show notes below. Irish public radio reporter Natasha Murtaugh is our guest on the Sacred Steps podcast. Earlier this summer, during the COVID pandemic, you had the opportunity to walk freely in Ireland, and you did this great walk along the Wicklow Way. And I've just been following all the posts on social media, and and the little things that happen when you're out along these great public spaces. And, there's a stag, and we saw these bunnies, and, all this, but the beauty of Wicklow really just comes out in your radio piece and what you shared on social media. And I wondered if you'd talk a little bit about the Wicklow Way with our audience today.
Of course, yeah. Well, as you said, it was just it was during coronavirus times, and we had gone through our first lockdown when you really couldn't do anything. We still, unfortunately, have a 5 kilometer limit. I can't go anywhere past 5 kilometers unless I'm doing something for work, like reporting or going into the office. But we had this horrible first lockdown at the beginning of the year where, again, we couldn't move, we couldn't do anything. Pubs were closed, this was that. And then when it was lifted during the summer, I just thought, oh God, there's going to be another lockdown. We need to do something epic while we can.
Yeah.
And I'd always wanted to do the Wicklow Way because I'm from Wicklow. I live in Wicklow. I'm in Wicklow right now. And it is the best county of Ireland, in my opinion. There's so many places to walk. There's so many forests. We're lucky because we've got the Wicklow Mountains on one side, and then you've got the amazing coast on the other. So it really is the best of both worlds. And we don't, we're away from Dublin City, but not too far away. It's the perfect county, really it is. But I was ashamed to say that I'd never done the Wicklow Way. And my lovely friend Nuria was living with me during coronavirus because she's from Canada and her family were all the way in Canada. She was living in Brussels. And just before lockdown, I didn't want her living alone in her apartment. So she actually moved in with me for 3 months. And she also loves hiking. We have done some amazing hikes together. The best one probably, we did the W hike in Torres del Paine in Patagonia and Chile together. That was epic. But so I said, look, let's go and do the Wicklow Way. Let's just do it tomorrow. Let's just get a tent. We'll get our sleeping bags and just do it tomorrow. Now, the Wicklow Way, it says in the guidebook, it says, it's a 7-day walk. And we did it in 4 days. Or was it 5? No, I think we did it in 4. 4 nights we slept in the tent. Yeah. And we brought all of our own food because there's one pub. Now, it says there's one pub, but if you go off the path a little bit, you will get another one, top tip. And so we packed our bag full of, tuna and bread and easy stuff. And we started in Phoenix Park in Dublin, which I thought was a really cool place to start because you're in Dublin City and it's this massive park and there was loads of people everywhere. We were really lucky with the weather. But, there's Nuri and I with our backpacks on and our hiking boots trudging through Marley Park. And there's people in suits having their sandwiches on the, on the grass while they're on their break from the office. And there we are and so you quickly come out of Marley Park and you kind of just immediately then start scaling up and going along this winding path. And then you just totally disappear into the Wicklow Mountains and you don't see civilization for a number of days. So it really is wild, which I really loved. It really felt like the Wicklow Way and you were a million miles from everyone. And then, so I think the first 2 days we didn't see anything. We were really in the Wicklow Mountains and we wild camped. So we had our tent, we had everything we needed. We didn't need to stay in hotels or anything. And then I think Glenmalure was the first pub. Oh my God, the excitement. I think it was day 3 and we didn't know there was going to be a pub, so it was a total surprise. And we're coming down into this town called Glenmalure, and then we see the sign for the Glenmalure Lodge, and I was like, Nuria, I think we're going to be able to get a pint of Guinness. And she was like, don't play games with me. And I was like, no, I really think so. And we get there, and there's this pub, and just as we got there, it started lashing rain. And because of COVID, there was still this rule that you couldn't just go into the pub and have pints. You had to have a meal and you had to leave after an hour and a half. And so it turns out this pub is actually really, really popular. It's one of Ireland's best pubs. I've been back since. It's in that radio piece that you would have listened to. Yeah.
Yes.
And so we went into the pub and, there was other hikers there, but they weren't doing the Wicklow Way because they looked like day hikers. They were in jeans and stuff. They looked more civilized than Yuri and I. We had ferns popping out of our hair and everything. And we sort of came in out of the rain and everyone in the pub was just, because we're both quite short and we're both girls and we had loads of stuff on our backs. So they were probably God, good on these girls. Where are they coming from? And we ended up sitting at the bar and we ordered our food and I think we smashed 3 pints of Guinness in 30 minutes because we were just this is it. This is the last pint of Guinness we're going to have. And we both love Guinness. And the lads behind the bar and I think everyone in the pub was just getting so much entertainment from the two of us sort of sitting at the bar, cackling away. And the barmen ended up saying, look, you don't have to leave after an hour and 30 minutes. We'll just move you over here where you don't take up too much space and you can stay. And we ended up having 6 pints of Guinness each. And we hadn't set up our tent, and it was dark and it was raining. And so people in the pub, this one man came up to us and he was like, I hope you don't take offense to this, but we're actually staying here in the lodge. Would you two girls like to take our room key? Me and my wife will stay down here and you can have a nice hot shower. And we were like, that's so unbelievably kind. But what with the old virus, we probably shouldn't be going into your room and touching more things, you know. But anyway, off we put our ponchos on and we left the pub in the dark and in the rain, and everyone was just laughing at us. And sure enough, we set up our tent underneath the tree on a bed of moss, and we went to bed. We set up a fire and we went to bed pretty quickly after that, because I think we had a nightcap of some whiskey. But we woke up every day. We woke up every day with no hangovers. Now I think we brought, those big sacks of wine. I think it was 6 liters of wine. And anyone we met along the way, they were like, you really sacrificed like bringing more food. You chose 6 liters of wine. And me and Yuri were like, oh God, yeah. Oh yeah. But we had the most wonderful time, and it was so special. We didn't meet any other people that were doing the full thing and wild camping until I think the last day. So we felt pretty chuffed with ourselves. You know, we were 2 young women doing it on our own, wild camping, and we did it in a very impressive time.
You made fantastic time finishing the Wicklow Way. I don't know if it's a world record, but I think maybe as a pandemic era record, I think you get definitely credit for that.
Yes, I think so too. Thank you.
If you're interested in the Wicklow Way, we'll link it in the show notes below, because this is an add-on. If you're looking to visit Ireland and you're making your way up to Dublin or what have you, County Wicklow, you can just pop over, spend a few days out in the Irish countryside, because as you mentioned, Natasha, the route is really disconnected from most of the populated cities and towns, and you're actually out in, the Irish hills and experiencing Ireland as it has been for years. But there are pubs. Like you did find the pub, so that's good. You get the best of both worlds on your experience.
Oh yeah. And it's wonderful. Sorry, just before we go off the Wicklow Way, when you peak and you come up to the highest point, you're going along the very top of the Wicklow Mountains, and you can see the whole Irish Sea, and you can actually see out to Wales over in the UK. It's amazing route. So for those who are listening and thinking about where their next steps might be, this is certainly an alternative as you're looking to visit Ireland post-pandemic. Natasha, in the brief time that we have left, I really want to get your take on your next steps and learn a little bit about, we've seen and heard your voice as a reporter for the Irish Public Broadcasting Company. We've read your book, and I'm looking to see what's next for you. Well, I wasn't going to leak this, but seeing as you're very nice.
Wait, are we breaking news?
We are breaking news. This hasn't been released on any of my other platforms, but
both of our listeners are sworn to secrecy. So if you're listening to this,
well, seeing as they're majority from the US, I assume. But who knows? I am in the middle of doing my own podcast. It is called the Nosy Fox Podcast, and it's a podcast about people and storytelling. And so each episode is an interview with a seemingly ordinary person telling a rather extraordinary story, whether it's about love or heartbreak or overcoming something or hiking or religion. It can be anything. And some of the people that I talk to are strangers and some of them are friends. But my favorite thing in life, and is probably the reason why I became a journalist, is I'm so interested in people and storytelling. And so I thought, why not create a podcast about that? So it'll be coming out, I hope, maybe the end of May.
That would be great. So we'll add it to the show notes. Be sure to look for it. And the name is going to be the Nosy Fox. So you're pulling your Instagram, podcast, social media handles in. That's fantastic. We'll link that in the show notes below. And definitely click subscribe to hear more of Natasha and more of her guest storytelling. So you heard it here first on the Sacred Steps podcast. I'm so grateful that you would choose this platform to make your big announcement. Maybe this is just a practice announcement. You seem like a nice guy, Kevin. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you for joining us today on the Sacred Steps podcast. I am so grateful to hear your storytelling, to firsthand experience the story from the book, Buen Camino, learn a little bit more about walking in Ireland and especially the Wicklow Way, and to look forward to what you have coming up, Natasha. Please be well and stay safe, and Buen Camino.
Buen Camino. Thank you, Kevin.
This has been the Sacred Steps Podcast. Visit sacredstepspodcast.com for episode notes, links, or to contact Kevin. Watch us online on YouTube. We read every comment. Please add your review and feedback. Before you go, tap subscribe to have episodes added to your playlist. Until next time, Buen Camino.